Trig equations, part 2, algebra 2 trigonometry regions. The part 2 of our trig equations basically means with factoring, which I'm sure you're thrilled to hear. So solve algebraically for all values of x in the interval 0 to 2 pi, which we know is 0 to 360. The fact that they want the answer in radians just adds that extra little bit to it that our final answer, if we get 30, we should really write it as pi over 6 and stuff like that. But that doesn't affect how we're going to start the 90% of this problem here. So 2 sine squared plus 5 sine x equals 3. Right away, when I see this squared part, I'm already thinking, all right, I'm probably going to have to factor. It's just like x squared. And I mentioned in the previous video that it's helpful to often think of this as simply x, as sine is just x, and solve the equations that way. And then you could always convert it back to sine x. But the steps are the same as the previous video steps. That's why they're not rewritten here. It's just solve for the function, but in solving for the function, we have that factoring step included. So I need to factor this. But first, I think it'll be helpful for most of you to temporarily let sine x just equal x. So 2 sine squared x, we're just going to write as 2x squared, plus 5 sine x is just plus 5x equals 3. And solve for x in that. And then once we get x equals, we'll change them back to sine x equals. All right, so solving this, it's been a while since we factored something like this. What we need to first do is set it equal to 0. So I'm going to make it 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. And this is going to require AC factoring. AC is the front times the back, so 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Split the middle. What multiplies to negative 6 adds to 5. That would be a positive 6 and a negative 1. So 2x squared, a positive 6x, and a negative 1x minus 3 equals 0. They would combine to be positive 5 and multiply to be negative 6. Split it down the middle, factor the left. I could take out 2x. My quotient would be x plus 3. I could take out a negative 1 here. My quotient needs to match, but it does, which I'm good. So that tells me I'm doing well so far. I get that x plus 3. So then I group together GCF here, and I end up with 2x minus 1 and x plus 3 equals 0. Then we turn them into solutions. And remember what that entails is basically you set each one of them equal to 0. So 2x minus 1 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. And you end up with x equals, you'd have to add 1, divide 2, so x equals 1/2. And x equals negative 3. So that's solving for x, but we have to remember what we're really solving for is sine x. So once you're done with the x equals part, rewrite it to be sine x equals 1/2 and sine x equals negative 3. And so now we're looking for angle x. Okay. First, deal with these one at a time. And now this is exactly what we had in the previous video. When you had sine x equals 1/2, you wanted to figure out, all right, what 2 quadrants were you in, and so on. Let your calculator get one of them. Reference angles, same distance from the x-axis for both answers, so on. So sine x equals a positive 1/2. Sine's positive in quadrants 1 and in quadrant 2. I would love for you to hopefully just know this, but when is sine 1/2? The answer is 30. But if you don't, second sine 1 divided by 2, your calculator is going to tell you 30 degrees. So that is our quadrant 1 answer of 30 degrees. And our quadrant 2 answer also needs to be 30 away from the x-axis, and that's 30 away from 180. 30 short of 180 would be 150. And we know we can check both of those in our calculator like we did yesterday. Sine 30 is 1/2, and sine, oops, didn't hit enter there. Sine 30 equals the 1/2, and sine 150 also equals positive 1/2. So that's it for that one. Then you got to take a look at your other sine x equals. And often you're going to get something here that works. But in this particular case, we get a reject. And I can tell you why. Let's first type it into our calculator. Second sign, -3, enter, error. When that happens, you're going to reject it. The reason why that's happening is because remember what sine is. Sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse, right? Well, the bottom has to be the larger number, right? The hypotenuse is the longest side of the triangle. So if you ever do something small divided by something large, you always get a number less than 1. So sine theta must be less than 1, or on the negative side, greater than -1. It can't be in between that. So when you take a look at like your number line of -1, 0, and 1, sine is strictly between these values. Sine and cosine is strictly between -1 and 1. It can't be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It can't be -2, -3, -4, -5. It's got to be strictly between that because it's a number divided by a larger number, opposite divided by hypotenuse. So this right there. So if you ever get sine equals anything greater than 1 or less than -1, you can type it into your calculator, second sign that, but automatically you can know that it's going to reject right there. So we're left with just these two answers. That doesn't happen in every one of these problems. Sometimes I could have ended up with um, -1/2 here, and then I'd look at the other quadrants, or I could have ended up with rad 2 over 2 or something like that. Um, but if it's ever beyond 1 or -1 in either direction, and the same goes for cosine, because cosine's adjacent, also divided by a larger hypotenuse, then that's the problem. Now, if we're dealing with tangent, since tangent's opposite divided by adjacent, that doesn't have that restriction. Either one of your legs can be larger, opposite or adjacent, right? So tangent can be 3, 4, 5, or something like that. But sine and cosine, they have that restriction, so that would get rejected. Um, quick time check, about 7 minutes. Let's do one more quick one. What value of x does not satisfy the equation? So it does not satisfy the equation. Oh, one thing, we wanted this in radians, didn't we? Um, so remember, if they want the answer in radians, give the answer in radians. So angle x, 30 degrees is pi over 6. That's a good one to just kind of know. 150 degrees, you can do times pi over 180, or you could recognize that it's 5/30s. So that would be 5 pi over 6. And that would actually be your final answer. Okay, next one. Which value of x does not satisfy the equation? Okay, well, you can guess and check here since it's multiple choice, but let me do the solving practice here. So first, let's think of sine x as x. So that's really just x squared plus x equals 0. The factoring part is a GCF, x and x plus 1 equals 0. Set them both equal to 0. You get x equals 0 and x equals, or let me do x plus 1 equals 0. So x equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0 becomes x equals -1, and then convert it back to sine. So sine x equals 0, and sine x equals -1. Okay, now, when sine and cosine are 1, 0, -1, stuff like that, what that means is they are quadrantal. And the calculator will tell you that when you do second sine 0. You get 0, meaning 0 degrees. And second sine -1, we get -90, which we know we could add 360 to those negative angles and make it 270. So I'm looking at 0 and 270. But it's tough finding out the other quadrants. Remember, there's often two answers. So when it's quadrantal, I would maybe draw the quadrantal picture, which is labeling these coordinates. Would be helpful. This is 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, 0, and 0, -1. And then, as always, make it CS, 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 CS. So when is sine 0? Sine is 0 here, and sine is 0 here. This is the 0 coordinate and the 360 spot. Remember, 0 and 360 right here. And this is the 180 spot. When is sine -1? Sine is -1 here at the 270 spot. So there's actually multiple answers in this case. And the quadrantals, basically, sine and cosine are 0 in 2 spots, but they're 1 in only one spot and -1 in only one spot. So that's actually the only time with the trig equations where you get one answer is when you have sine or cosine that happens to be 1 or -1. So like sine is +1 only here, -1 only here, but it's 0 in two spots. And the same goes for cosine. So these are my answers. So which one does not satisfy? Well, 0 degrees is 0. That's not there. 360 is the same as 2 pi. So 2 pi works. I'm looking for something that doesn't. 180 is pi. 270 is 3 pi over 2. But 90 degrees, that is not one of my values, because at 90 degrees, sine is 1, not 0, not -1. Okay, so it's really just more solving trig equations, but there's a little bit of a factoring step involved in there, maybe some AC factoring, which is a little bit of some old material, but it's good to review. So we'll practice tomorrow.